6-year-old to use a squatty potty, or getting your toddler to sleep in a time zone 11 hours ahead. So today, I'm going to touch a bit on why I've dragged my kids to 40 countries, how I've stayed sane, and why I'm just this side of crazy enough to be doing that. So as a bit of background, I've got a goal of getting to 100 countries by the time I'm 50. And I'll be 47 in 2 weeks, and I'm in 86 countries.
Oh, you'll do.
And by the end of the summer, I'll be at 90. And I have another 3 years to have to get those final 10 countries. But these countries are getting more and more obscure and hard to get to. I'm just kidding, I'm not going to Pakistan or Somalia. Yeah, exactly. So why is this interesting enough for me to be here at the podium? And it's because, as I mentioned, I've dragged my 2 kids, who are only age 11 and 13, to more than 40 countries. They're still young, so that means I've done a lot of schlepping with a lot of little people. I don't mean teens or tweens or toddlers. I left the country with these kids when I was still on maternity leave. And over their respective years, they've had the chance to meet a lot of exotic characters, to eat a lot of exotic foods, this was a fun one, and to visit a lot of different exotic places. I'm just showing, obviously I'm just pulling a few highlights. So these are lovely photos, right? They're a lot of fun. But I'll say, you don't need to be a super mom to do this kind of travel. I'm certainly no super mom. And frankly, Sue will appreciate this, when I was invited to speak about my travels, the original title of the talk I had proposed was Have Kids Will Travel, Tales from a Mom Who's Yelled at Her Kids in More than 40 Countries. A little more realistic and honest, right? And if I was really going for honesty and not just a pithy title, I would have added and argued with her husband in each one of these 2. Right? But there were some people I was chatting with as I was planning the title of the talk, and they thought the yelling, maybe some people would be offended. And I'll say this, if you're shocked or offended that I've yelled at my kids while traveling, you would be hyperventilating at the places that I've dragged them to and the experiences that I've forced them to have. Because really all they want to do wherever we are is sit by the pool and eat potato chips. Right? But the yelling is meant to convey that despite some really fun photos, and I've got a lot of awesome photo books, and believe me, my social media post on Facebook is very colorful and fun, but traveling with kids can be immensely frustrating and hard. It's not always the rosy picture that my Facebook might show. For example, kids need to pee, and sometimes the only options are, in fact, squatty potties. Overland border crossings can mysteriously be closed for hours on end when you have your luggage and your kids and you're hot and tired and thirsty and hungry. Food can be both humorous and difficult to order. Right, in green pea. And jet lag can hit in some inconvenient locations. I love this with her feet up on the chair restaurant. It's hysterical. Right? Yelling happens because kids misbehave and travel is frustrating, but on the other side, I always say some of the worst experiences make the best stories. For example, we went on safari, and in the proverbial backseat of the safari vehicle, my kids are fighting. They're fighting. The backseat of a car, except the car's a safari vehicle, and I start freaking out at them and I'm yelling and screaming until I get shushed by our guide and incidentally the other passengers because some elephants and giraffes are about to come walking by. So we still talk about that. That was not my finest moment, nor theirs. So yes, I'm going to give you some takeaways about travel with kids, and I can only hope and assume that many of you will be better and more patient parents, grandparents, and travel companions than I am. But let's be real, there's so much out there about family travel and travel with kids, right? There's book after book, there's magazines, there's websites, there's blogs. So I'm gonna do a bit of a bait and switch with you right now. In fact, I'm not gonna talk anymore about traveling with my kids. I'm gonna talk about traveling solo, as a wife and as a mother. So has anyone here traveled on their own? I mean, a business trip counts. You've gone on your own, you're not traveling with a colleague, but you're going totally on your own, you've got a business trip. Has anyone gone to like a yoga retreat or writing retreat? Like, you know you're meeting up with a group, but you're going on your own. Has anyone said there's something I want to go see or do, like out of state or out of country, and gone by yourself to go do it? Connect. Has anyone wanted to, but maybe hasn't had the confidence to do it themselves? And is there anyone for who this quote, I love this, to awaken quite alone in a strange town is one of the pleasantest sensations in the world? Are there people for who, like, this really doesn't ring true? You've got zero interest in going and doing it on your own. It feels like so far beyond anything. I'm gonna drag Allison on a trip with me one of these days. I'm gonna try to convince you otherwise. But I'll be honest, like, traveling alone is hard. It's lonely. You're self-conscious, right? But the rewards and the self-development and the self-confidence building can really change your life. It's really changed mine, and I'm gonna share a few experiences as to why. So I was showing you some cute travel photos of my kids, and what I didn't mention yet is that I've been married for 18 years, and I've been to almost 90 countries, but for a third of those, I've been on my own. I've traveled on my own. Now, admittedly, a good swath of them were back when I was 24, and I left my PR job in New York City to go backpacking for 3 months, and I came back over a year later. And I logged a lot of countries, my wanderlust was ignited, and I really kind of understood the power of traveling on my own. And I really had to do it then, right? Because once I came home and settled down and got married, I wouldn't have the chance to travel again, right? Until I met Adam, who's my husband. And I met him 6 weeks after coming back from my year-long backpacking trip. And he had spent the year before teaching English in Thailand, and he had traveled through India and Nepal. And so he understood my kind of culture shock coming back. He was interested in my trip, and in fact, our first date at Cactus Cantina on Wisconsin Avenue, like, we brought our various travel books, and we looked at our travel scrapbooks back when you would actually print out photos, right? And we found a shared passion. And so he and I, over the years, pre-kids, negotiated 2 different leave of absences from 2 different jobs. So in 1999, we were still in DC. We did a 3-month trip through Southeast Asia. Fast forward, we moved to California, we got married, blah, blah, blah. The year after we got married, we had different jobs, different employers, asked for leave of absence, and did a 4-month round-the-world ticket. And we had to do it then, right? Because we wanted to get all this travel done before we were gonna have kids. Because once we had kids, then you really can't travel. Except we had kids, and we kept traveling, right? We took them along. But I have to confess, on all these great trips, I'd always sort of missed the independence of solo traveling, of the decisions that are totally mine to make, and the activities that I want to do, and the doors that open and the invitations that materialize when you're traveling on your own. A lot of these things don't happen when you're traveling with a travel companion, and they certainly don't always happen when you're traveling around kids' sleep schedules or their food preferences. And some years ago, I'll admit I was downsized from my corporate communications job. And I was depressed. I was on my couch. I literally couldn't get off my couch. I was crying. I'm kind of obsessing why I lost my job. Like, my confidence was shaken to the core. And the employer had the audacity to let me go in September. It was like right after Labor Day, and the kids had just come back to school. And I was like, if they had just let me go in June, I would have taken that. I would have said, thank you for the severance, right? And I would have pulled my kids out of whatever day camp, and we would have gone on some epic road trip, right? Or I kept saying to Adam, like, I would have left this job to go backpacking in India. Like, but now I felt like it was September and I was trapped. My kids were still young, it was like 4 years ago. And so I'm just this side of crazy. I was like, oh, I'm gonna pull them out of school for a month. Like, I have this time, you know, like, and I looked into tickets, and my husband's looking into he take leave, and ultimately, wiser minds prevailed. And he said, take your trip, like, you go. And he knew it would get me off the couch, that it would break my depression, get me to stop obsessing about everything that just got out of my life, and frankly, get me excited about life again. And I did take that trip. And for a month, first I went to Indonesia, and not just Indonesia, like the mountain villages of Sulawesi, where these villages do these like massive funeral processions, and met a lot of colorful characters. These are like chewing, if you've heard of cat, I think it's called, this like chewing tobacco. These women all have like black teeth. Saw the local buffet being prepared. There's a lot of photos of the process that I will spare you of. I went to my first cockfight, which I had heard about but never seen. I went to a bullfight, and this was not with like matadors, this was like bulls fighting. I then pushed on to India, where I met a lot of colorful characters again, visited temples, and did some amazing hiking in the Himalayas. And I did all of this on my own, without my kids, without my husband, and it made me realize how important that part of my life still was to me. And in fact, I think solo travel and its perspective-changing benefits are one of the most appropriate things to be talking about here at Bethel at the House of Worship, where we're supposed to be focusing on our growth and our spirituality. Here at Bethel, we're a place where we aim to find ourselves and how we fit into the universe. And I find travel, not just travel, but solo travel specifically, to be a formative spiritual experience. And all the more so as an opportunity to escape from my Bethesda soccer mom and carpool driver routines and push myself in ways that I never thought possible. And it gives me a chance to learn about myself in unfamiliar places and unfamiliar situations and see the world through a different perspective. So traveling back then got me off my couch when I was lost and floundering. And I came home confident and independent again, and in fact, so much so I started my own freelance communications consultancy, something I had always wanted to do, but frankly had never been bold enough to do before. And years later, today, it's still therapeutic for me. I admit sometimes I feel like my life's vitality can be buried under the daily routines, and that I'm always making choices for everyone else around me, but not always for myself. And travel makes me break that pattern and really live for myself. When I travel alone, it gives me a chance to pursue my own interests beyond what my husband or kids might want to do. For example, spending 10 days at an ashram in India and doing yoga and meditation. Or hiking the Andes in Patagonia and sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a refugio because I was just too tired to hike down, right? And taking like a motorcycle taxi ride in Vietnam. I mean, obviously something I would never let my kids do, right? Or partaking in the free meal that they offer to pilgrims at Sikh temples in India. My husband would be mortified, right? There's no way he would ever let me do that. So for me, I can travel without the demands or expectations of anyone else. I can feel unencumbered and free, if only for a few days or a few weeks. So how do I make this happen? We have to acknowledge travel, of course, it does cost money, and I realize that many consider it a luxury. I consider it a necessity and an investment in experience. But truth be told, it's not that big an investment. I often travel on $20 or $30 a day, and I've coined this the crazy traveler way, where you travel on the cheap, out of your comfort zone, and sometimes you really are downright uncomfortable. For example, that ashram in India, I spent $8 a day, food and accommodation included. Now I was sleeping on a mattress on the grounds, and I did a Siva stay, which means I helped in the kitchen before and after meals. Right? In Vietnam, I booked my own room at a sociable hostel with a rooftop deck. I spent $13 on the room. I hung out on the rooftop deck. I met people the night I arrived, and the next morning, I walked around with a group of people to go see Ho Chi Minh's mausoleum. Right? I had an instant community of people. They weren't going to be my best friends, but guess what? I had folks to tour the town with. In Chiapas, Mexico, where I was this past January, I took a 10-hour bus ride for about $4, and as a snack, ate a plate of street food tacos for about $1.50. And I'll take tuk-tuks instead of taxis, and I'll take bicycle pedicabs instead of tuk-tuks, all in the effort to save a few shekels along the way. And yes, some of this is in service to traveling on a budget, but much of this is by choice, right? I confess, maybe it's an attempt to kind of go back and reclaim the me that I was at 24 when I really did only have $10 or $15 a day to make my money stretch, right? So again, it's me and my choices. I do believe you can have a personally fulfilling experience staying at the Four Seasons. So if that's your style, go for it. But I'm here to talk about Crazy Traveler, so I'm going to share a few more Crazy Traveler principles and rules of the road along the way. Okay, I'll move on. Okay, these are a few of my, I won't call them tips, sort of principles, right? So we spoke about the importance of feeling like you can go do this alone. It's okay to be a wife and travel alone. Now, it must be said, my husband is like the Ruth Bader Ginsburg husbands of travel, right? Marty Ginsburg enabled Ruth to become Supreme Court. My husband, Adam, is the Marty Ginsburg of travel, right? He's very supportive. I should say, I need you to know, he travels about 60% of the time, like in the real life, and so I'm on my own with the kids, and then we do this flip, so there is some equity in it. It's okay to be a mom and travel alone. It's quite liberating to have conversation after conversation